All right, let's get making dough so we can prepare our sficha, cheese pies, and menushe. A few of our main ingredients include yeast, sugar, olive oil, flour, and salt. So let's talk about yeast and the different varieties. So you probably have seen two different types of yeast. One is an active dry and one is an instant yeast. And they both do the same job but just perform a little bit differently. So let's talk about what makes them different. I have instant yeast here and I keep it stored in my refrigerator or freezer, and that helps to keep it fresh. If your yeast turns and goes bad, you will not have rise in your dough. So one of the big things is if you are not sure the last time you used your yeast, you probably want to buy some fresh ones just to make sure that you get the actual rise for your dough. So instant yeast is exactly that. It does not need the time to actually bloom or kind of poof up in your water and sugar mixture. An active yeast does require that bloom time, which is where you would add your yeast, you'd add your sugar or honey, you add your warm water, and you kind of watch it poof up to make that active ingredient work for you. Instant yeast you can just add right directly to your mix and you will have the same effect. All right, for making our dough, we're going to be using 1 tablespoon of yeast, and whether you use active or instant, you use the same amount. We're going to use 1 tablespoon of sugar. You can substitute honey if you'd rather do that. I typically just use sugar because it's easier and on hand. All right, to our yeast and sugar mixture, we're gonna add warm water. And I still do this even with my instant yeast, and it will still get a little bit of bubbling effect. Your active yeast should have quite a bit of bubbling effect. And make sure we're stirring it to incorporate everything. And then I'm gonna set this aside for about 5 to 10 minutes in a warm place. Oftentimes you can just pop it right into your microwave, do not turn it on, but just that warm place for it to do its thing. Another tip that you should just be aware of is when you're adding your warm water, you want it to be about 110 degrees. If you don't have a thermometer, that's okay. You just don't want it to be scalding hot and you don't want it to be cold. So kind of in that warm where it's comfortable to touch your finger to the water, and that will be the perfect temperature. So to make dough, of course, we need flour. We are using an all-purpose flour in this particular recipe. You can use a bread flour if you choose to, which is higher in gluten, but for this dough, just a simple all-purpose flour works. I have not experimented with gluten-free flour, so I am not sure what the effects would be, but you are welcome to do a test run and try it, or if you've already made dough with a gluten-free flour that works for you, definitely choose that recipe. So I'm going to be using a stand mixer to mix my dough. That is the easiest way to do this. If you're doing it by hand, just get a large bowl. You're going to be just using your hands to work the dough to really knead it. And I'm going to be adding 6 cups of all-purpose flour to my bowl here. All right, once I have my flour measured, I'm going to be adding some kosher salt. I usually add about 3 teaspoons. If you're using table salt, you want to definitely half that. And then to our flour and salt mixture, we're going to add 4 tablespoons of olive oil. 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so depending on what your mixer looks like, this is it's called an Anchor's Rum, and my dough hook looks something like this. And this is what I use to make my dough. If you have a KitchenAid mixer, which is probably a little more common, your dough hook is gonna look something like this. So you wanna make sure that that is fitted to your mixer. So as we have all of our ingredients except for our yeast water in here, I'm just gonna give this a quick mix just to incorporate everything, and then we'll go check on our yeast. Okay, about 5 minutes has passed, and let's take a look at that yeast. You see that lovely top layer there? That is what you want. If your yeast does not do this, then it is not good and you don't want to use it. And I actually recommend doing this little test in this 1 cup before Sunday, before you even attend class, just to make sure that your yeast is active and is going to work properly. So we're going to be adding this cup with the yeast in here to our flour mixture, and then we're also going to add 1 more cup of warm water to the mixture, and then we're going to incorporate it, let it knead for about 5 to 6 minutes until it is fully elastic and has that great consistency. Okay, so this has been going for about 4 minutes or so, and I'm noticing my dough is still a little bit wet. I'm gonna add just a smidge more flour, about a half a cup, and then I'm gonna let my mixer go again until it really kind of combines to make a cohesive dough. Okay, so let's talk about dough texture. So I added a little bit more flour, but my dough still feels a bit sticky. So you can kind of see it sticking to my hands here. So I'm gonna add a pinch more flour, and it really just depends on your area and your region. Sometimes your dough might be a little more wet, sometimes it might be a little more dry, and you'd add a little more warm water. Since mine's a little on the stickier side, I'm gonna add a little bit more flour, and then I'll show you what it looks like. All right, if we take a look at our dough now, you notice it is pulled away from the sides and is really just on our dough hook. This is what we want. So if you need to add a little more flour as you're mixing, just kind of start sprinkling it in until it gets fully incorporated and your dough starts pulling away from the sides just like this. Okay, now that our dough is fully incorporated, I'm gonna go ahead and take my dough hook off, just wipe down any dough off of it. And it still will be a little bit sticky. It's not going to be completely unsticky. It is dough. And I have 2 hooks on mine. And I'll take this off. So here is my ball of dough. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drizzle just a tiny bit of olive oil, maybe a teaspoon or so, just right on top. And then with my hands, I'm going to kind of work into a ball. And make sure all the sides are coated. Actually, I'm gonna take it out completely. We can just do this with our dough. Make sure we have it coated with oil. And it will look something like this. Put a touch more olive oil in our bowl. And then we're gonna put this right inside here. Coat the front, coat the back, and then you're gonna cover this either with plastic wrap or a damp towel. I have a little lid for mine, and we're gonna allow this to proof, which means we want it to double in size, and it should take between an hour and 2 hours. And then we will come back and check it and see what it looks like. And tips for proofing your dough. You can do the same thing you did with the yeast and pop this into the microwave. Just let it go, set a timer. The other thing you can do, sometimes ovens actually have a proof setting. You can put this in your oven under the proof setting, or you can also set your oven to about 100 degrees for about 3 to 4 minutes and then shut it off, and then you can put your bowl inside there. But just make sure that you know that you have dough in the oven before you go ahead and turn your oven back on. Sometimes I'll put a sticky note that just says dough, so I know I will not preheat the oven and risk burning anything or melting something. So let's let this proof. Be back in 2 hours. All right, so about an hour and a half, 2 hours has passed. I'm gonna share my dough with you. So you can take a look, it doubled in size and it is nice and elastic and perfect for working with. So we're gonna set this off to the side and have this ready for our class. If you have any questions in the meantime or while you're making this, feel free to shoot me a message.